Well, Sony's definitely keeping us on our toes right now because out of nowhere, we get another article dropped from Wired where they had an interview with Mark Cerny, who's, of course, the system architect. And we know at this point, Jim Ryan kind of taken over things going into the next generation from what we're kind of seeing right now. And they had just a second blowout of information. Now, we heard some stuff before from Wired that was right around the time of E3. Do you remember they put that out like ahead of E3, and we ended up talking about the PS5, and Sony's not even there at E3, and Microsoft then had to go on stage and talk about the Xbox Scarlet, and it wasn't really too much new. Like, we already knew about the SSD being a part of next generation and everything. It basically sounded like they were describing a PlayStation 5, and that was very calculated on Sony's part. But this was just them putting out information through Wired, and it's kind of the new way we're getting this news from these companies. Now, I do think we're still going to get some big event happen from Sony, and I'm sure Microsoft might even hold their own, where they actually show the system being used, because at this point, we've only heard people who are interviewing them use the system, and there is just a metric ton of information here. And here's the interesting part: it's not all about how powerful this system will be. We already assume that it's going to be more powerful, of course, than the PlayStation 4 Pro and the Xbox One X. All of that is assumed. We're more curious, at least I am, as to what else they can do to make the experience better for us, right? That's the biggest thing. Sure, everything will be shinier, and it'll probably be, a lot of people assume native 4K and all that stuff, but what else can you do to make the playing experience different or better? And they had some answers here, and it's kind of interesting to see. So let's go through what Wired got out of Mark Cerny and Jim Ryan, because it was quite a bit, and we'll kind of explain what's happening here. It's very, very interesting to see some of this stuff. So here we are, exclusive, a deeper look at the PlayStation 5, and I'm going to go ahead and drop a link to this article down below, and we're just going to kind of go through some of the big points that they talked about here. And the first thing that I saw, of course, they call it like a giant burden. They're going to call it the PlayStation 5, shocker, and it's coming out holiday 2020. Another surprise. Not really. We pretty much figured this. This isn't surprising to me anyway, or probably you. Wow, it's called the PS5, and it's coming out next holiday. It's not coming out this holiday, obviously, and I don't think they're going to wait till 2021 to bring it out. 2020... and it's called the PlayStation 5. And it's really funny because in the article, Jim Ryan talks about how it's like a giant burden has been lifted from my shoulders, that it's called the PlayStation 5. Wow, that's quite the burden there, Jim. Yes, so PlayStation 5, holidays 2020, and they kind of go over all the stuff they talked about previously. We're going to have a CPU from the Ryzen line and a Navi-based GPU, all of which we assumed, and of course they talked about previously, so great, makes sense. They're sticking with AMD. Sure, I don't think they're going to do any mix match like Intel and Nvidia, or go all Intel or see what Nvidia can do. AMD does a good job with their CPUs and their GPUs combined, so go to one place to get it all done. Makes sense, right? So he goes on, this is Mark Cerny, by the way, system architect, of course, goes on to talk about ray tracing. Ray tracing became a bit of a bigger deal than I thought it would when they originally talked about it, because as we know ray tracing now, of course, we know it with the RTX line of cards from Nvidia, and we know that it is a killer for performance. It is tough. A lot of people will even turn it off because they don't see the massive benefit now. They see the massive drawback, which is that your frame rate gets cut down pretty badly. Now, I do think ray tracing will be used fairly creatively going forward, since we're going to see a market be pretty much built up for it around these systems, the Scarlet, Xbox Scarlet, and the PlayStation 5, both of which should be using ray tracing. Look, if the PlayStation 5 is going to use it, you can assume that the next Xbox will also. And Mark Cerny went on to talk about how it will have hardware-based ray tracing. So it's going to be built into the GPU that's in the system, which is good because people were concerned that they would try to force it through software, and that would be tough. I'll admit, that would be very, very difficult. Now, Nvidia, of course, has their own little cores in their video cards and everything, so I'm going to be curious how all that goes down. That could be that they talk about what secret sauce and all this stuff. That could be the thing that they really develop around. Being one of them, I'll say. Are these just hardware-based solutions to ray tracing? So that'll be interesting to see. They didn't get too in depth around that, I think they're waiting to actually show us, because they can describe it all day long, but we all know when they show it, that's when we'll go, okay, that's something. But if you're a PC, primary PC user, you should be very, very interested in what they can pull off here, because of course the PC will get, you know, the bigger video cards for, you know, $1,000+, and you'll get a ton of benefit out of the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Scarlet chasing ray tracing, because it will translate well to the PC. So this is a good thing. You'll also see, I assume, some very creative uses of it when it becomes much more mainstream, which is what these systems would do. And who knows, we could see some really neat techniques and stuff being used with ray tracing. So I look forward to that. And then we went on to the optical solution, you know, for I'll say the optical disk drive and how they're going to do all of this. We got to get into the SSD a little bit here, though, and he talks about that here as well. So we know that the big thing about the SSD is that it is way faster than a 5400 RPM disk drive, the hard disk drive. Way faster, especially when it comes to random read writes. We get it. It doesn't have to spin up. It just sends a command. It's like, I need this, and it just goes, here you go. That's it. So much faster. But what's interesting about this, and it's not even something I really thought about, Mark Cerny explains this pretty well. We see games that are very, very large, right? We do. And he explains it in this way. If you look at a game like Marvel's Spider-Man, there are some pieces of data duplicated 400 times on the hard drive, and the SSD sweeps away the need for all of that duping. So not only is its raw read speed dramatically faster than a hard drive, but it saves crucial space. And then they say, hey, they can use it in several different ways. They can build out further, they can use that space for more, or they can just make the game smaller. Like games, it's going to sound weird. Going into next generation with this massive shift away from a mechanical hard drive to an SSD, you might actually see games get smaller because they don't have to have all of this unnecessary files on the game. Wouldn't that be interesting to go up in power and then down in file size? That would be fascinating to see. However, I do think you're going to see companies and developers probably still push the envelope, because according to Mark Cerny, they will have 100 gigabyte disks to work with. And that's good, because we're seeing games like Last of Us Part 2 already come on 2 Blu-rays. We saw Red Dead Redemption 2 come on 2 Blu-rays. So it makes sense. Those would have been 100 gigabyte games, or just about, with 250 gigabyte Blu-rays. So that's good to see that they'll have 100 gigabyte optical discs. And I know a lot of you PlayStation users out there are wondering, yes, it will be using 4K Blu-ray drive, so you can watch the ultra high def Blu-rays on there. Most likely, I'll also say we'll see upscale to 8K with that, as believe it or not, some TVs for 8K are already getting kind of like cheaper. I say cheaper. They're in the high 2,000s, lower 3,000s now for a good one at this point, or a decent one. So it is getting to the point, I think, in like 2 or 3 years, 8K will probably be close to what 4K was like 2 years ago, where it wasn't like super cheap, but it wasn't like, you know, 10 grand for one. So we're getting to that point with the 8K. Keep that in mind, and I think you'll see upscaling for that specifically. Now, just because though we're moving to 100 gigabyte discs and a 4K Ultra Blu-ray drive doesn't mean we don't still have to install the games, and that is something that they point out here. The bottleneck is still going to be that Blu-ray drive, just flat out. That's the way it is. You put a disc in, it's still going to have to install it. But it looks like they're trying to figure out ways kind of around that, to the point now, we've seen this before. Microsoft has done this with their Xbox One for a little while now, from what I remember. But usually I'll just either download the whole game, or I'll just pop a disc in and let it install. But they're going to let you choose different parts of the game that you want to install. They describe it here as multiplayer versus single player. You beat the single player, you just get it out of there. If you've played like Master Chief Collection, for example, they have endless options for which ones you want to install and all of this stuff. So this isn't a new concept, but it appears that it's going to be something that's going to be more system-wide rather than just like a game-by-game basis if they want to spend the extra time doing it. Like, it sounds like more developers will have access to this. So if you beat the single player and you just want to keep the multiplayer installed, and that single player is like 30 gigabytes, you can get rid of it. This also makes me wonder if we're not going to get a 1 terabyte drive, because they're putting this kind of effort into space saving, and that's going to concern me a little bit. I think these systems need at least a 1 terabyte SSD, and I also don't think we're going to be able to use a mechanical drive like externally. You know how we can technically plug in a USB type or USB 3 drive in, and we can of course use like a standard 1 terabyte, 2 terabyte portable drive. I don't know if we'll be able to do that. We'll probably have to get SSD portable drive. So we'll have to keep that one in mind as well. I do like the idea of separate installs, but I do also wonder if that's because they're cutting it close on cost with either a 512 gigabyte SSD, or if they are going to be able to get to that 1 terabyte. Now, they also talk a bit about the UI, and I like this because the UI is sluggish. We'll say that on the PlayStation 4 and especially the Xbox One. There is a new dashboard coming out for the Xbox One that's supposed to streamline it a little bit, but man, that thing is slow, and it really bothers me. The PlayStation 4 isn't great either, like I said, with the store and everything, but it sounds like with these SSDs, we'll be able to move around a lot quicker, and they're going to design specifically around it. Some of the interesting parts they pointed out was being able to see into your game without actually loading it up. So you might boot up a game to see what's going on in the multiplayer aspect or even your single player, rather than just kind of hover over the icon, it sounds like, and you'll be able to see information where you left off, who's playing right now, what games they're in. That's most likely what's going to happen here, and I like that idea too. That's pretty cool. Everything we can do to cut down on time to go from starting the system up to actually getting into a game, I'm all for. Now, this is where things get kind of interesting and a little unique. I'll say that, a little unique here. And that's when they start talking about the controller. Now, they do describe the controller as looking very, very similar to the DualShock 4. And I made a video a while ago asking if, or at least speculating on, do we need the controller to really change much? Specifically from like the PS4 to the PS5 or the Xbox One to the Scarlet. Do we really need them to change and alter that much? I don't think so. I mean, you can improve the internals, obviously, and there was one thing that I'm glad to hear that they are improving here, but I don't think the form factor has to change all that much. But there are still some really interesting things here because they were handed a prototype controller that has a hole in it, and there is some speculation that could be for a microphone that would use that AI, the AI assistant that we saw patented by Sony, so like an Alexa or something for your controller, which would be kind of neat to see. And I know microphones are okay. Are we really getting into that space right now? But everything has a microphone. You know, my phone has a microphone. Everything around you, for the most part. If you have a phone, there's a microphone next to you at all times anyway. But the interesting thing about the controller is, yes, they are moving away from the, I'm going to say, the more archaic rumble, and they're going to move to haptic feedback, which is good. It's going to be similar to what you have right now in the Joy-Con controllers, which we've seen some cool instances of that with 1-2 Switch, for example, where you can feel like marbles rolling around in the Joy-Con. They do say they're going to have basically a haptic feedback motor in each side, so that makes sense. That's what we figured, and that's good. It's going to also save on battery, which they do say that they have a larger battery in this controller, which is great because I'd like it to last, more than one play session at times. And they are also going to have what they call adaptive triggers, and this was really, really interesting to me because basically developers will have the ability to change the tension on your triggers as you're using it. So an example they point out is when you're pulling back a bow, it's easy to pull it first, and then as you get further and further back, it becomes more difficult, and that's the idea with the triggers. So easy to press down, and then it slowly gets harder and harder. That way you get kind of this feeling of just the struggle to pull the bow back. I like that idea. That is a very cool, unique idea. And the person who was doing this interview, who had, by the way, what it sounds like the exact same dev kit that we saw from Gizmodo and in those patents, and then we saw Let's Go Digital kind of make a render out of them, got a chance to play a couple of games, whether it's Gran Turismo, for example, and they're going through it. And they are noticing that the haptic feedback is giving them a good sense of kind of the ground as they're rolling over it, and you feel the rocks and the gravel and everything, and then they feel the triggers getting tighter at times. That is a really cool experience and a fun evolution, I'll say, of the controller. That's great. Now, of course, haptic feedback, yeah, we've seen that for a while. Like Apple was doing that with their touchpads, right? Yeah, okay. But to see it kind of get to this level in a controller like this, along with the adaptive triggers, is interesting. So I do like the controller getting a bit of an evolution there with the triggers. Thankfully, they're also going to be moving away from like the really annoying, micro USB. They're going to be moving over to Type-C, which is great. Everything should be. The new Xbox Elite controller is going to as well. I think what's that, this holiday, it's coming out in November. So that's great to see. I'm done with the old USB technology with that, where you're trying to figure out which way it goes and everything. USB-C on everything, please. It's been so much better with the Switch to have that with the Pro controller and everything else. So yes, USB-C everywhere, please. And then we get to the point where they talked to a few developers. They talked to EA, and EA was like, oh, this is great. But the part that I liked is that they do talk to Blue Point Games. And Blue Point Games is getting something ready, and I'm excited because we of course know them to do great remakes, right? We've seen them. The biggest thing here, of course, Shadow of the Colossus, great game. But I'm interested. I'm trying to figure out what they're doing. And we've heard rumors of Demon Souls. That'd be something. But as they say, we're working on a big one right now. That's from Marco Thrush, who's the president of Blue Point Games. And I want to know what they're working on. I wonder if they are going to be ready to go when the PS5 gets revealed. And that will be something that we could look for maybe February next year, March. And then we roll into E3. And then we have, like I said before, about 10 months total, probably from when they reveal it to when it comes out at the end of the year, holiday 2020. If they are there with something insane, right, to do, whew. Like, all right, so the focus right now is on them with something like a Demon Souls, but what if something crazy happens? What if they have, like, what if they remade the original Metal Gear Solid? I'm just throwing that out there, okay? What if they did something crazy like that in conjunction with Konami, and it's like a PlayStation exclusive because they paid for the development? That would be nuts, right? That would be some crazy, crazy stuff. And then EA goes on to talk a bit about it. Oh, it's great for us. Machine learning. We'll be able to figure out the odds better and loop. No, I'm just kidding. They didn't say that. But they did talk about how it is just a big step in the right direction with the SSD and everything. And development, interestingly enough, the costs might actually go down for development next generation. Wouldn't that be something? And then I do want to point this out because I've seen some people kind of miss this a little bit. They do talk about how Ghost of Tsushima is going to be a PS4 game. That kind of has been throwing people off. We're not sure. Is it going to be a PS5 game? They did confirm one more time that it will be a PlayStation 4 game. So a massive blowout of more information for the PS5. And I have to say, I like Sony's approach here because they are talking more and more about the features around the system outside of just the horsepower and just raw power of it. And that's good because we know they're going to be more powerful, but I want to know what else you got. And I think at this point, we found out all we really need to know until we get that event that takes place. I think it'll be in February, just throwing it out there, where they show the PlayStation 5 actually working. Like they show up with a large show, you know, half hour, 40 minutes or something. They did this with the PS4. They showed the Unreal Engine 4 demo, for example, and that was really, really cool. They talk about the 8 gigabytes at GDDR5, but they show up here. They show the load times. That's the biggest thing, right? They have to show the load times, I think. And then we, of course, get into some of the visuals and how amazing it looks and all of this stuff. But I like hearing about the controller, seeing cool evolution with the adaptive triggers, and of course that SSD and some of the improvements around the UI. I'm liking what I'm hearing right now, and it's interesting to see Sony do this because they're leveraging just how the internet's become now. They don't have to have a big event to spread information. You go get an outlet like Wired, you have an interview with them, and then Twitter and YouTube and websites outside of that will do the rest. So, fun stuff. Looking forward to next year. PS5, Xbox Scarlet, maybe some new Switch revision, as of course that's been a rumor for about 3 or 4 years now. It's going to be fun. But let me know what you guys think about this down below. Hopefully I went over as much as I could and gave you guys an idea of what's going on. And make sure you like the video on the way out. Dislike it if not, and get subscribed because we're going to have a lot of fun with the PS5 and the Xbox Scarlet next year. I'm telling you, it's going to be a good time. I'll see you guys next time.